Needless to say, the Philadelphia Eagles had a very interesting and very roller coaster type of 2013 season. Year one of the Chip Kelly experience. That opening Monday Night Football game against the Redskins, everybody was ranting and raving about how this offense was going to dominate the league, take the league by storm, and everybody in the copycat league that is the NFL was going to try and mimic and copy certain elements of it. And they lost like 3 games in a row, and everybody's pooning Chip Kelly and the Eagles and talking about how you can't run that without a defense. It's not going to work, and it's going to be a failure, and Chip Kelly's going to be a failure. But eventually, the Eagles righted their ship. They got behind Nick Foles as their starting quarterback. He had what you could classify in the second half of the season as an MVP caliber season. He ended up throwing for like 27 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. A tremendous season from Nick Foles. The Eagles end up winning the NFC least division by beating the Cowboys in Week 17. They go on to the playoffs, come this close to beating the New Orleans Saints in the opening round of the playoffs. So it would have to be classified, I would think, as a very successful year for Chip Kelly and the Philadelphia Eagles, from going from a team that was picking fourth in the 2013 NFL draft based off of that disastrous 2012 season to now picking 27th in the 2014 draft as a division champion playoff team. Now the challenge for the Eagles is taking that next step in going from just being a division winner in the worst division in the NFC to becoming a championship contender. Now, they may have taken a bit of a step back, some people feel, by releasing Deshaun Jackson this offseason, but maybe this is one of these things where they felt it was going to be addition by subtraction. It was one of those situations where, yes, he was a talented player, but some of the baggage and garbage that he brought to the table just wasn't needed, and if anything, was maybe hurting the Eagles organization a little bit. Ultimately, time will tell. But that set them back a little bit. And like I talked about, this is an organization that now needs to take that next step. And one of the biggest things they needed to do was address defensive depth in this offseason. They made a few free agent moves here and there to try and address that, because if you're going to run that offensive scheme that Chip Kelly wants to run, and you're going to be about creating mismatches through tempo, and you're going to score very quickly, meaning you have one of the lowest amounts of time of possession on offense in the National Football League, your defense is going to be on the field a lot. So as important as maybe having star quality talent on defense, you need to have almost every position be too deep, because that defense is going to see the field a lot. And here in the 2014 NFL draft, it was going to be very important for the Eagles to do a couple of things. One, try and replace Deshaun Jackson and his production. Two, provide that necessary defensive depth to allow them to run the offensive scheme that they want and be a little bit more of a balanced football team. And when you look at their draft results down below, you can see where the Eagles' philosophy was. They were looking to replace Deshaun Jackson and his production, and they were looking to add defensive depth in different places on that side of the ball. In terms of their best pick in this draft, I will go with Jordan Matthews, the receiver they took 42nd overall out of Vanderbilt. I love this kid. I had him graded as a first-round prospect. This is a kid about 6'3", 210 pounds, and he can move in low 4.40 range. But he's more than just a size speed guy. I think this is a guy that could do a lot of things as a wide receiver, and I envision him at the very, very worst being a solid number 2 wide receiver at the NFL level, and I think he has number 1 wide receiver potential. He was highly productive in the toughest conference in America at a school like Vanderbilt, of all godforsaken places. So this is, again, a guy in Jordan Matthews that I thought was a great get for the Philadelphia Eagles, a pretty good value there to me anyways, and me alone maybe. He was a bit of a steal. And a guy, again, that you're trying to, maybe replace Deshaun Jackson in his production. You also got to look at it, too, from a standpoint of they did re-sign Riley Cooper long-term, but Jeremy Maclin's coming off of a knee injury, and he's only under a 1-year contract. So even if you kept Maclin long-term, you could use more depth at wide receiver, and if you allow Maclin to go after this season, now Jordan Matthews is ready to step into the starting lineup, and there's him and Riley Cooper and then more. In terms of the best value they got in this draft, especially for what the Eagles are looking to do on the defensive side of the ball, I went to Chip Kelly's roots in Oregon in this draft, actually twice. But the pick that I really loved for them out of Oregon was their 5th-round pick, Taylor Hart, the defensive end from Oregon. I see this guy as a perfect type of run-stuffing, Brett Kiesel type of 3-4 defensive end. And I think to get him at the beginning of round 5 was really, really good value. I had him rated as a second to third round prospect in terms of his talent. To be able to get him at the beginning of round 5 and knowing that Chip Kelly is familiar with him, so may understand better how to get the most out of him, I thought this was a tremendous value for this Eagles organization. It helped address defensive depth, and you got a guy that could potentially start in a year or two on that side of the ball. A guy that could surprise is Jaylen Watkins, the defensive back from Florida, with all the focus on Roberson and Purifoy. It was maybe Watkins that was viewed as perhaps the best or safest NFL prospect. Here's a guy that could defend outside on wide receivers. He could line up in the slot in nickel and dime situations. He's a guy that could maybe play free safety. A perfect type of guy to get at the beginning of round 4, again, that I think will end up starting at some point in time for the Eagles in 2014. But most importantly of all, bring depth that was necessary to that defensive side of the ball. In terms of things I might second guess the Eagles for on this draft, Marcus Smith at number 26 seemed to be a bit of a reach to me. I do think it addressed a big need, a bigger need than a lot of people were talking about. Everybody focusing on corners and on safeties, maybe inside linebackers. There's just talk of, well, they have Trent Cole and they have this at outside linebacker. Well, Trent Cole comes with a very hefty price tag. How great of a fit is he ultimately in that system long term? Brandon Graham certainly not a fit for that scheme. There were rumors and talk about them trying to trade for Deion Jordan with the Miami Dolphins. A guy like Marcus Smith comes in as a long-term replacement to a Trent Cole, as a more natural fit, in my opinion, as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But at least maybe as a rookie, as a guy that definitely, at worst case scenario, provides some explosiveness off of the edge and provides, most importantly of all, again, some depth on the defensive side of the ball. Now, for all the depth that they needed on the defensive side of the ball and the upgrades that they did need to do there, I'm a little uncertain of why they felt they needed to go wide receiver twice in the first 3 rounds. But it's hard for me to really knock it because they got 2 receivers I really liked in Jordan Matthews and then Josh Huff, the other kid that the Eagles took from Oregon. Here's a guy, where Matthews is an outside wide receiver, could potentially profile as a long-term number 1 wide receiver, which is something that the Eagles really lack with getting rid of Deshaun Jackson. You have Cooper, who's a number 2. Macklin, for all intents and purposes, is a number 2. They really needed that number 1 type of wide receiver. Now you get a guy like Josh Huff, a guy that could line up some outside, but you can line up in the slot. You can figure out a way to manufacture some touches with him. It's really hard for me to knock it. I just wonder if, especially in a draft with a lot of guys very similar to a Josh Huff, if they hadn't necessarily taken another wide receiver in round number 3. In terms of my final grade for the Eagles, I kind of vacillated between a C+ and a B-. I'll ultimately go with a B- because at the end of the day, I thought the Eagles had a really solid draft. Now, yes, I do think Marcus Smith was a little bit of a reach at number 26, but at the same point in time, at least they traded back a few slots and still got their guy. And at the end of the day, he might not be that huge of a reach, but I love what they did here in the middle portions of this draft, getting Matthews and Huff and Watkins and Hart. They got some help at wide receiver for the young quarterback Nick Foles. They attempted to replace the production of a Deshaun Jackson, and at the same point in time, brought some necessary youth and defensive depth to that side of the football where they so needed it. So I ultimately given them a B-. Like I said, it was a solid draft for the Philadelphia Eagles. Was it enough to help them take the next step? I'm not sure about that. They're probably still another year away from that, in my opinion. But this draft definitely didn't hurt them in that journey to get to that point.